Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of MSL Insights. Today, we're going to be discussing novel approaches to engaging KOLs and gathering insights from virtual congresses. My name is Samuel Dyer, and I'm the chairman of the board for the Medical Science Liaison Society. And for those on the line that don't know, the MSL Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and in fact, the only organization dedicated to advancing the global MSL profession by helping MSLs and managers become more effective in their careers. We accomplish this by offering numerous unique resources, including the first and only board certification for MSLs and MSL leaders. And in simple terms, like any other certification, it allows experienced MSLs and managers to validate their skills and knowledge of the MSL profession based on criteria determined by a large number of independent MSL and medical affairs leaders from some of the top pharmaceutical companies. Anybody interested in learning more about the MSL certification can certainly go there on the screen. You'll see the URL on the bottom of the screen. So, as a reminder, also, nominations for the 2020 MSL of the Year Awards are still open. There are 8 categories this year, including MSL Rookie of the Year, MSL of the Year, and MSL Manager Rookie of the Year, as well as MSL Manager of the Year. With each having a US and outside the US awards, this year we'll also have 12 highly experienced MSL leaders that will be judging submissions. The awards are completely free to enter and win, and you do not need to be a member of the MSL Society to participate or win. We'll send you a link to everyone to learn more. Just as a reminder, all nominations and applications need to be completed by September 9th. So before we get started, just want to go over a few quick technical details. As participants, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. However, in your control panel, you'll notice that you have a question panel. We encourage you to type your comments or questions into the question panel. Throughout the discussion, we'll try to address as many relevant questions as possible. As with all of our previous MSL insights, we do not share a lot of slides in the show. So this is really going to be about a panel discussion, and certainly you guys are all a part of that. That is an important part of our show. So we've also been asked by several people if this will be recorded. Yes, we are recording this show, and it will be available on the MSL Society's website for everyone very soon. We just need a few days to put it together. We also want to thank H1 for sponsoring and partnering with us for today's show. You see their URL there. We encourage you to go check them out. They do a lot of really cool things for MSLs and some other interesting ways to capture data. So I encourage you to check them out. So that brings us to today's show. We are going to be discussing novel approaches to engaging KOLs and gathering insights from virtual congresses. For today's show, we've had over 715 MSLs, managers, directors, and VPs from over 46 countries register. So it's clearly an important topic. And as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, medical conferences have become virtual and have forced MSLs to pivot to this new reality. And engaging with KOLs and gathering insights and having valuable exchanges is a real challenge. And so understanding how to adjust to this new reality and having it will have a direct impact on the success of MSLs during virtual congresses. So today, to discuss this important topic, I'm joined by Dr. Eddie Power, who is the VP North America Medical Affairs with Pfizer, and Rob Consalvo, who is the Director of Strategic Commercial Engagement with H1. Eddie, Rob, thank you very much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me, Sam. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Rob. So I want to start our show with sharing the results of one of the questions from our ongoing survey leading up to this show today. And here's the question that we asked about 373 MSLs. So this is preliminary data. But here's the question we asked. We asked, if you have participated in a virtual medical congress, were you able to have valuable scientific engagements with KOLs during the event? And I think the data is startling. So 56% said no. Another 25% has said, I have not participated or attended a virtual Congress. But the most startling result was that only 18% had said yes. So question again, if you participated, were you able to have valuable scientific engagements with KOLs during the event? Again, only 18% said yes. Eddie, I'm going to start with you. When you hear this data, are you surprised by it, and what's your reaction?
I'm not surprised by the data. Perhaps that the yes percentage of 18% is so low, but I do feel that we've all entered into this new world, and we're all still finding our way through it, whether it be from our medical affairs perspective or whether it be from our KOL stakeholders perspective. And I think, broadly, that there's a couple of reasons. One is, I think, perhaps more internal, and it's around what's a compliant way of engaging online when perhaps you may need to be relying on the technology or the platforms that the Congress is providing. And that may actually work in a similar manner for the KOL. But the second one is, I think it's a fundamental change in how we normally interact, where in an in-person Congress, you're in essence held captive for a few days at a certain location, and all activity revolves around that location. So there's more opportunity, right, to find time to engage when there's mutual gaps in schedules. Whereas online, you have, I think, a couple of different issues. One is everyone is not a captive audience. People may be dipping in and out. They may just be entering the Congress for specific presentations, conversations, and then exiting again. And that makes it, I think, more difficult to actually establish a connection in order to have an engagement.
Yeah, I think it's a great points made. Rob, what is your response to this?
It's similar to Eddie. I'm not terribly surprised either, to be honest with you. Just in the experiences that I've had with some virtual events so far, it's hit or miss, right? And a lot of it really depends on a couple of factors. One, sometimes the organization that's putting it together has some issues that pop up just as a natural course of putting on a brand new type of event, right? As Eddie mentioned, we're in a brand new territory here, and it applies not just for us as industry, but for the conference presenters themselves, right? It's a whole new set of challenges that the organizations probably got really good at solving in person, but now have to change their entire strategy. And then the captive audience piece, Eddie, I think you're 100% spot on as well. The reality of it is not just for ourselves as people attending the event, but the people who we're trying to engage, right? So the KOLs who probably still have a ton of different things vying for their attention, right? Especially if they're working from home or changing their situation. Just a completely different landscape, and maintaining that level of engagement is really challenging. So I wasn't terribly surprised. I hope that by the end of 2020, the numbers change a little bit for people's experience. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think what it says is, and I guess I'm not real surprised either, except for I think the one thing it does tell us is that there is a struggle going on. We are having to pivot and make adjustments. If you only got 18% saying that there's valuable scientific exchange going on, then obviously there's some opportunity, which leads us to really the first place I wanted to start with today. And Eddie, I'm gonna start with you on this as well. Planning and attendance strategy obviously has changed and adapted to this virtual environment. What has worked for you guys? What have you seen? Maybe some best practices. What has worked?
So I think one of the I think key differences with virtual congresses is that it's not quite a level playing field in terms of what data are being presented or communicated. What I mean by that is that in an in-person congress, everything is live, and you can plan to move around between different sessions, go into an exhibit hall, go into a poster session. With virtual congresses, the format tends to have a limited number of live sessions, and the rest is available asynchronously. So I think that in and of itself requires some kind of planning. The asynchronous material that you can access at your own leisure or in your own time, I think is easier to plan for. We normally plan in terms of insights to have one or two of our teams attend and make sure that they gather those insights. But the other piece around this is the actual communication that goes on around whatever platform the Congress has set up, and that could be a chat function, it could be a Twitter room that's been set up separately, and then what we find is more successful is actually to have a small team of people who are kind of monitoring and triaging the comments that are being put on these platforms, and then bring those back into the team. It doesn't necessarily have to be real time, but by going through that, you can pick up where KOLs or attendees may be asking or commenting around your own portfolio, around your own medicines, and it gives an opportunity then to kind of prioritize those comments and then triage them back, and potentially reach out to those KOLs, HCPs who have made those comments or have asked questions, and offer them the opportunity to follow up and therefore have subsequent engagements.
Excellent. Yeah, I think this is great. I mean, the monitoring and I think that's part of the planning and monitoring, and who is capturing that, I think is very important. Rob, what have you seen other companies? I mean, what has worked with some of the companies you guys are working with?
Yeah, so I want to echo everything that Eddie had said, right? I think knowing the tools that are available to you through the conference group, I mean, that's incredibly valuable because it tells you how they're thinking about developing the engagements, and then you can strategize around that. Understanding what hashtags are going to be out there for social media and trying to figure out, again, strategizing internally on a compliant way to leverage those different resources. Eddie, you mentioned like the planning process and the sessions and how you're actually engaging each of those different pieces of content that are available. So whether they're asynchronous or live sessions, knowing and then planning each of those accordingly and allocating the right amount of resources to those situations. I've also seen folks really use the booth. So if the organization has a booth set up, like a virtual booth, leveraging that well, and again, using social media to promote that, using the standard channels that you would already. And then the last thing is, because of the setting, right? These are virtual, more people are going to be able to attend realistically. So instead of just focusing on those top KOLs, this is also an opportunity to engage some of those more community level folks in a meaningful way, and develop some of that as well. So we've seen a lot of people that are starting to look at their strategy around how they engage community level people within the framework of these larger congresses, because now they actually have the the bandwidth, right, and the actual access to these people in a consolidated way that they might not have had before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is excellent, and I think that what you guys are, I mean, certainly what you both have alluded to, and what I would add to this is just to capture some of this is in thinking about best practices is having MSLs cover a virtual or live Congress without a plan is a complete waste of time. And part of that plan is capturing information and certainly monitoring the information. Eddie, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's critical, and it's not just an MSL plan, right? I think in this virtual setting in particular, it's kind of a cross-functional plan, and that each of the functions and the respective colleagues who are attending knows exactly what the role is. It's easy to duplicate efforts online because everybody tends to dive in and do the same thing, right? Whereas in a in-person setting, there are very defined areas. You tend to find salespeople at the exhibitor's booth. You have medical information in the medical booth. You have your MSLs, like in the poster sessions. Those lines get blurred when you go online, and particularly that there can be blurring when you have a virtual booth, and where's the commercial side, where's the MedInfo side. So I think that planning and the definition of roles and responsibilities in that virtual Congress setting is actually quite critical. And one of these things, Samuel, there's also a kind of behavioral change. And what I mean by that is that typically, as MSLs in particular, our relationships, have been predicated on a one-to-one basis in our local geographies or local regions. And we kind of got to step away a little bit from that in the virtual setting. Be able to delegate some of those initial contacts responsibilities to a coordinator who can then triage, as interactions come in, who's the right person then to have further engagement. So I think that having that plan is an absolute must.
Yeah, and let me just certainly address. I said MSL plan. That's just because I'm absolutely 100% biased. I admit my biasness, because we're the MSL society, and there's hundreds of MSLs on this call. But I agree with you. I mean, this is all about obviously fitting into your medical strategy. If you don't know that, and you're going to a Congress and you don't have that in mind. But what I was alluding to, and I'd like to get both of you and Rob to address this. We got a lot of comments and questions, and so one comment said, Raymond said 18% sounds too high. I'm curious about that myself, Raymond. And so Neil said, and I'm just taking some comments and questions from the audience. Will the data that is being discussed for the survey results be shared afterwards? Yes, absolutely. We are going to create a report, and that report will be available to all MSL Society members. But Sunil, we're actually thinking about sharing some of this data with the public as an infographic. So we'll be looking for that. So here's a question from the audience that I'd like for both of you guys to talk about, and I'm going to compound this a little bit. Melissa has said what the 18% doing that is considered meaningful engagement with KOLs in the virtual Congress space. I think, Melissa, what you're asking here, and if I'm wrong and I've captured it wrong, please add a comment. I think what you're asking is, what is that 18% that they're doing that is so meaningful? And I guess, Eddie, I want you to talk about that first and then add to that. Can you talk about some approaches to capturing information?
Yeah, so in terms, let me start with there's kind of two parts there with that meaningful engagement. the way I interpreted that was where you actually have a meaningful scientific discussion with a Congress attendee, right? A KOL, a HCP, whoever it is. Now, the way I read that, so one of the things that we have tried to do is if there is some kind of question or engagement, we'll try and set up something that's separate from the Congress platform to make sure that it's compliant, right, with our own rules and regulations, but B, to also kind of have that standalone time where that meaningful engagement can take place. And it may be a different time of the day, it may actually be a different day altogether, right? It doesn't have to be at a fixed point in time in the same way that you would do that you would have that that in-person interaction. And then the second part, Sam, I think you were asking was a little bit about collating the information. Was that right?
Yeah, capture, so maybe some novel approaches or what you guys have been doing, some approaches to capturing information, because I think that's part of that value add, right? I mean, 18% are valuable. Well, part of that is presumption is that you're having a meaningful exchange with a KOL to capture anything meaningful. So that's kind of lumping those together. But if you have any thoughts on sort of capturing information as well.
Yes, so typically the way we've been doing it is predicated on the meaningful interaction. We normally have whatever colleague is having that interaction, document that and then put it into our kind of CRM systems, and those could be unsolicited medical requests, that we respond to. It may be an insight, right, that derives from that particular interaction. It could be a request for any materials that come up during the Congress, and something that we would triage to a medical information department for them to fulfill any of those requests. So we try and capture that at that kind of individual, meaningful interaction level. For the rest, for things like poster sessions and all of that I think is not as time sensitive. Typically a lot of these virtual congresses now leave the content up for 30, 60, 90 days, right, post-Congress. So we tend to do that a little bit more systematically and have our MSL teams, assigned to certain portions of that, and for them then to bring back not a verbatim read, but just any insights that they can glean, because the content is actually there and available, for all to read.
Yeah. And I think what you're really talking about here, and again, is you're talking about planning and objectives, right? I mean, having a solid plan on who's covering what is what I'm hearing a lot of here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rob, any thoughts on this? We talked about that. That was a kind of a compound one. I threw at both of you, but we had the 18%. What does that even mean? What are they doing to do that? And kind of what you're hearing for approaches to capturing information?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things, just conceptually, I think it's important to consider the events as slightly different beasts than they were before, right? They're more elongated, right? And what that means is our traditional way of monitoring and understanding the effectiveness within a setting needs to also be elongated as well. So Eddie, I really liked what you said about continuing to monitor that content long term, because I think that's the reality with how people are interacting with this information. The other piece that I'd like to just offer in terms of how to drive some of that meaningful engagement and what that could mean, we've heard it as folks that are sharing very specific content that is customized for a person's unique need, right? That ultimately is a meaningful engagement. when you are having that. And that really speaks to that sort of asynchronicity of the actual way these events are structured now, right? Being able to share that content, to have that that discourse taking place in the absence of a direct interaction. In terms of tracking, I think it's important to maintain the things that are working, but it's really valuable to keep in mind that it's within the CRM systems, you need to be able to monitor those instances and those events in a unique way, right? Because they do represent a unique and new approach to engagement. So it's important to at least have that represented as well. Otherwise, what will end up happening is there could be some poor understanding of the actual events that are taking place there.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it as well, is again, treating these as separate events, but having a solid plan for both. Um, Great, we're getting a lot of really good questions and comments in the chat here. Here's another comment. I'll just address this one. Brian has asked, is there any survey or anecdotal evidence that HCPs are missing interacting with industry, in particular medical, at these virtual congresses? Or are they happy with this new platform and don't miss the interaction? Brian, we actually have H1 and the MSL Society actually conducted a survey, and we polled 475 KOLs on what they want from MSLs during the COVID-19 pandemic. You're going to find that KOLs are expecting and wanting to continue engaging with KOLs, but we did not specifically ask about virtual congresses. So maybe that's a future survey. So I just wanted to make you aware that the survey is out there. And if you want to know that survey, you can download the entire report and the infographic that's available to the public. I'm going to ask one more question here, and Eddie, I'm going to start with you. This is from the audience. We get a lot of questions and concerns around building new KOL engagements, and especially experience versus new folks. And so David has asked, do you see any correlation between the ability to leverage attendance at a virtual conference by experienced versus less experienced MSLs and getting time to discuss science? Maybe that's a quick one, but just anything you've seen?
No, so I think certainly the more experienced KOLs seem to have more effective engagements, but the reason though that for that is not so much the experience versus the non-experience. It's that it's predicated on existing relationships versus trying to establish new ones. I think the establishment of new relationships is still something that we're all challenged with.
Yep.
In a virtual congress setting, the new engagement where we've seen it happen is more likely to happen after the congress, right? As a consequence of some data that was presented, and there's been some follow-up questions. Again, some of these conference chat rooms are sometimes left open for a few days after, and that's where we found more success in those engagements, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, any thoughts on that? I mean, have you heard anything with some of the companies you guys are engaging with?
No, I agree exactly with what Eddie said, right? I think that we're seeing new MSLs are still having to set up those engagements, and that the experienced folks are having a little bit less difficulty than that in the teams that we've been working with. But it's mostly just based on the fact that the experienced folks have the network of people that they can already just reach out to, and if a new MSL has a broad network due to extensive time in industry or whatever, they might have just as much luck as an experienced person. It really just is mostly predicated on that network.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you, and I would offer to anybody listening that This has nothing to do with experience and everything to do with planning and objectives, right? So an experienced MSL could go in and have no objective and have no goals and certainly not add value to a relationship versus some new person who goes in and nails that, and vice versa is true as well. So it's really not about the amount of experience as it is the preparation and of course, as you guys have talked about, tapping into that network. Here's another question from we're getting a lot of questions around this from Chad. And Eddie, I'm going to start with you on this. Chad has asked if you could talk about, says, best practice for compliant interactions at a booth with commercial and MSL involvement. Any best practices or how you guys are dealing with that?
Yeah, so what we've been doing is if we have a virtual booth, we still try and make sure that there's a delineation between the commercial booth and where we have something like a medical booth, that's very clearly and separately designated within the virtual congress setting, and we make sure that that any content, right, that is, say, in a commercial booth versus a medical booth is different, and that content, at least for us, is also reviewed. So we have a promotional review committee for the commercial side of things, and we have a medical review committee that reviews any type of medical content. But typically, we would still use the same kind of compliance framework that we would use in person. So in other words, if somebody goes into a commercial booth and asks a question there that is medical, then that virtual rep that we have in that booth will triage that separately to either medical information, if it's something that a medical information department can answer, or will triage it to an MSL to then have that follow-up conversation. Now, what it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a live or an immediate response. So typically, if it's an unsolicited medical request that goes to medical information, then that will be triaged through medical information, and the response will be sent maybe at a later time or even a later date, and we'll tend to do the same on the MSL side of things. So we try and make sure that everything is separate, is well defined, and that it very much fits within our compliance framework.
Yeah, so what I heard here was systems, maintaining that firewall, right, or delineation, yep. And obviously always remaining compliant, right? I think it's, yeah. Rob, any thoughts on this from other companies you guys are working with?
No, other than, I mean, Eddie, you've done a really nice job of outlining exactly what I've seen work really well across the board. And it really always just comes down to having that plan in place for how to delineate and remediate anything that needs to happen on the fly, right? It's the same as if we were to do these interactions in person, though when we're doing them digitally, it can feel different because it is a different setting and a different set of stimuli and interactions that we're having. But it's the same process ultimately that needs to be followed from a compliance standpoint. So maintaining that in a digital setting and just having that clearly outlined to make sure that everyone is comfortable with how to do that, that's extremely critical. And that comfort with how to do it is the thing that really does need to be decided on, trained, and planned, because otherwise you're going to run the risk of having challenges or issues.
Excellent. Yep, great points. Eddie, I want to talk about certainly reporting, right? And there's this whole idea of, and we're collecting some data on the value of post-conference reports. And is there is there value to that? And what that looks like now is virtual. Can you talk about, communicating and reporting conference insights internally? Because obviously one of the values that we hope that MSLs and medical affairs more broadly are going to these virtual conferences is that there's some sort of in ROI, and usually that ROI internally is some sort of actionable and meaningful insights. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, uh, typically, Samuel, one of the ways we found adds more value is not just to rely on some kind of written Congress report. I mean, that's always valuable, right, to have as a reference document, right, or a grounding. But it is actually we try and bring our teams together post Congress. Typically we'll have a debrief within the medical organization, and whatever sessions, presentations, posters that they accessed is to basically have a discussion around the insights that can be gleaned from that content. So it's not a verbatim or a summary repeat of what's been presented. We're trying to get at what are the potential insights that can be gleaned. The actual Congress report or document serves as a reference. If anybody wants to go back and look at the poster or look at the presentation, it's there. But we try and do that. Then we'll expand that and do it cross-functionally with any other parts of the organization that we're attending. So with commercial as an example, we'll share our respective findings, insights, and then from there we'll determine which ones to prioritize that may be actionable, and then also assign that action to initially a specific function, right? So maybe, okay, this is something for medical affairs, here's what the action is. It may be that we found there's a gap in efficacy data for one of our medicines. Is there something that we can do and go back and address that? There may be an action that's assigned to the commercial team, based on any comments that were there. It may be something that we think is more appropriate for our clinical development organization. If there's questions around different formulations or different types of delivery mechanisms. So that's how we'll try and coordinate all of that, so that everybody leaves with a clear assignment of responsibilities, right, and accountabilities, and we'll try and put some kind of timeline or time frame as to when those need to be actioned by, and then we'll have a regular series of follow-up check-in meetings just to measure progress, and then also to document the actual follow-up and actions that have been taken.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think the roles and responsibilities part is a really good best practice. Rob, any thoughts on this?
I just have some additional things, and we've talked about them a little bit, and they hold true in this portion of our discussion as well, right? Reframe our timeline, right? And you talked about it towards the end of your statement, but again, because of the length of time that this information is now being interacted with consistently, right? It's gone up significantly. It's important just to sort of refactor what amount of time we're operating within in terms of generating those insights. And the second piece is to embrace technology for generating and determining some of those insights, because what we're going to be recognizing, or what we should recognize, is that the amount of information that will now be generated around these, because of the digital setting that can be then accessed and interpreted, and insights can be extrapolated from, it's important to just potentially reframe how we're thinking about actually interacting with that information, and looking across all of these different channels with any luck to get a really good sense of those themes and those insights that could be garnered, right? I think it's a broader context that we need to start thinking about than just the interpersonal interactions that are held, and the insights that are gleaned from one-on-one sessions, or in the moment sessions.
Yep. No, I think it's great. And you know, it goes back to this whole thought process that you can gain insights and get information, but you don't do anything with it. They're useless, right? They just sit in a CRM or a spreadsheet somewhere. And so I think, you know, both of you have touched on this. We just got a comment from Alan, and Alan, your timing is perfect because it was about the next topic I wanted to go into. Alan has said, I'll just read Alan's, and then I'll tell you what I was going to go with this, and we'll make this a little bit of a compound. Eddie, I'm going to start with you as well. Alan said, I was hoping to hear tips and tricks on what MSLs can do to successfully engage thought leaders during a medical conference. Any ideas? And what I want you to I want to add to that is maybe you could talk about any novel approaches to engaging with KOLs and HCPs during a virtual conference. So what's working? Eddie, do you want to start?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing is actually using the whatever the chat function, right, or Twitter or whatever social media has been used to allow participants to comment on, you know, share thoughts, share ideas. And, you know, if we see somebody ask a question, write a comment on one of our medicines, then that's an opportunity, right, to follow up, you know, with that particular person, you know, and ask, is that I saw your question. And again, we try and do this in a, obviously compliantly, right, and but have that kind of follow up in the within the time frame, right, of the virtual congress, and engage that person in further conversation, you know, really based on the comment or question they've asked. The other piece that we were in essence piloting, experimenting with is really to have a virtual poster booklet, right, or abstract booklet that pulls together all the different posters or presentations, all the information that we're disseminating at a virtual congress, and having that virtual abstract booklet available in a virtual medical booth, so that somebody, you know, when they come in, can go in, click in, and access that information. And of course, the beauty of the digital environment is that you can tell who's clicking on. So that gives an opportunity then to have that follow-up engagement. You know, I saw, you know, you were looking at a poster booklet, and, you know, poster number 65 seemed to be where you spent your time and your focus on. Is there anything else that you would like to know? So those are two of the kind of tools that we're piloting, and you know, we'll see how successful that is, but you know, the early signs are encouraging.
Excellent. I'm going to come back to that because I have a follow-up question to that. Rob, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would just say, first off, Eddie, again, spot on. The tips you gave are fantastic. I would also just echo the use of social media, use of the platforms, and really just embracing those technologies, but also embrace other technologies that might be available to you within your organization, be it through asynchronous video creation or things like that you can use to engage the community in a meaningful way. To that end, also developing highly targeted and specific content. It will make those people who are on the other end of that feel very engaged to have that very specific piece of information that they can then come back to. Again, they've got a million things vying for their attention, right? So tapping into that immediacy can also help to drive that relationship and engagement. And on that, knowing those people that you are already engaged with in your community of KOLs and HCPs, tapping into that really well will be a very valuable piece. And then the last thing is really just to do your homework and not divide your attention. It's very tempting to, especially because it is a digital setting, to have two different screens up and check emails and all of these things. And in a non-virtual setting, right, it's really hard to do that because of the constant flow of activity. And you steal away and you check your emails when you have and things like that. But just making sure that you're mindful of the setting and putting yourself into the mindset of you are at the event and having that be your focus, I think folks will get a lot out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. And you know, it's about being focused. And I think that's, you know, and having a plan. That's great. Eddie, I want to go back to this. Joe has asked an excellent question. Joe has asked, we were talking about these virtual medical booths. Joe has asked, how do you manage this from a compliance perspective? But I want to broaden Joe's question and say, not just the virtual booth, but the overall virtual conference. How do you guys deal with that compliance issue, Eddie?
So for a medical booth, let me take a step back. So in the context of a virtual booth, you know, commercial booth, we're working to have a separate medical booth that compliance-wise is approved by our overall promotional review committee. So in other words, that the rendering, the flow of that virtual booth is compliant with whatever you know, Pfizer policies, SOPs, FDA. So that's the first part. For the content side of things, for the medical booth, we take it through. We have a medical review committee, and any content that's on that medical booth is reviewed by that separate medical review process. And then typically we do the same if we do get questions, right, that come up in the medical booth, like I was mentioning earlier, then that gets triaged to either our medical information organization or, you know, to an MSL. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be real time, right? That could then be done asynchronously. But occasionally what we will do, if we find that there's a theme or a similar set of questions, we will actually set up a separate, we call them Zoom rooms, a day after or a couple of days after the virtual Congress, or on consecutive days at certain times of the day, and invite those KOLs to attend those, to have their questions answered. And we cap, the reason for having more than one is that, at least in Pfizer, we cap the number of HCPs that can be present at any one time to respond to a question that may be off-label, for example, just to make sure that we conserve the integrity of that compliance framework.
Yeah, so it sounds like the review is critical to the success of this.
Absolutely.
Rob, any thoughts on that from other companies you guys are working with as this has come up?
Yeah, I think, Eddie, you really said it all. I mean, that the review process is critical, and making sure you have those plans for remediation, making sure you're controlling the amount of individuals that you're interacting with to reduce any risk of anything. I think you're spot on. I honestly don't have anything to even really add to that. I think you nailed it.
Excellent. We got a lot of questions around the value of this. And one question that came in, so Melissa said, is there any data on how many companies are doing virtual medical booths and if they are staffed? Yes, we're collecting data on that. Melissa will be publishing that soon. But she's also asked, and I'm going to read you two questions, and maybe we could address that quick, just because we're running out of time. But I think these are important. Said, do you feel the ROI is positive for virtual booths, and do you have your MSLs actually staff the booth? And I'm going to add to that. Maggie has said, how successful have the virtual have they actually been in your experience? So, do you do them? Is there ROI? Are the MSLs doing that? I'm going to start with you, Eddie.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the honest answer at the moment is it's a hit and miss. And we've seen interest in some congresses and very little, if any, in others. And part of that, I think, is predicated by how you actually get somebody to click on whatever entry point they need to click on, or multiple click on to get to that booth, right? So we're trying, very much trying to gather best practices, best learnings to see whether, in fact, there is an ROI on that, and there is value. There is value on that. Some of our virtual booths are not staffed, right? But there's the opportunity there for whoever's attending that medical booth and have a question to click on a link that will then triage that query or that question, to medical information or to the relevant MSL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Rob, what are you hearing? I mean, from your perspective and the companies you guys are engaging with.
Very similar, right? We're seeing oftentimes the booths are not necessarily manned, but in situations where they are, it's typically limited, but it is a small number of MSLs. In terms of ROI and the effect of all of these, it is still very early to draw any conclusions. I think it's easy for us to make the assumption that it won't be as impactful, but I think depending on how much attention gets focused on solving the problem of the engagement by the organizations that are putting on the events, I think we could see some pretty significant improvement of that across the board. Hopefully, even as COVID winds down and folks are able to get back in person.
Yeah, and I think companies, I mean, the organizers of these conferences are still trying to figure it out. In general, the virtual conferences have been kind of clunky, and obviously from the MSLs and medical affairs, we're trying to figure that out. What does that ROI look like, and should it be measured different? And KPIs, should they be measured different? I mean, I think there's a lot that we're still trying to figure out. We're still trying to collect data,
Exactly.
and as we collect data, we'll share it with with the MSL community. Yeah. Sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was just saying exactly. Like I think you're spot on.
Yeah. Yeah, Samuel, the only other just quick thing to add so even when we have in-person congresses and we have a medical information booth, we don't necessarily have it manned, right, by a person or persons. We often have a kiosk where a sales rep who's managed a commercial booth can bring over somebody who's got a question, and they'll put that into that kiosk, and that will then get triaged through. So it's something that we were already kind of doing even in the in-person forum, and it's just transitioning that onto an online forum.
Yep. Excellent. We're running out of time, but I always want to end. I always like to end our shows with sort of practical piece of advice or tip. Eddie, I'm going to start with you. What is one practical, very quickly practical nugget or piece of advice that you would provide or give to MSLs or MSL managers related to virtual congresses?
Yeah, so I think for MSLs, one of the key practical tips that I would give is to generate an email to their own KOLs, to their own HCPs prior to the Congress, with any information that they can share compliantly, sharing anything that may be being presented, again, if it's compliant to do so, and then, have that ready in advance. And I would also suggest not just one, but maybe have 2 or maybe 3 emails staggered leading up to the conference to make sure that at least there's an awareness and a potential to engage.
setting up expectation, right?
Absolutely.
Rob, any practical piece of advice or tip?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the biggest things to continue to improve these types of events is to give feedback to the event organizers on the experience, on the engagement, and then follow up afterwards with those people that you do have in your network. Same as Eddie just described pre-conference, do it post-conference as well.
This is excellent advice, both of these, and I will tell you, the MSL teams that we've seen, the really successful ones, that's a really important part of the success is the actual follow-up. It's one thing to know what the value is; it's quite another to execute on it. So I think this is great. We're out of time, but I wanted to certainly, Rob, Eddie, thank you very much for the insightful information today. I want to thank H1 again for being a part of this and sponsoring and partnering with us on this. Our next installment of MSL Insights will take place next Friday, September 4th. Again, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern live. The registration link for next week's show will actually be on the website soon. We had to make some final adjustments, but we'll be sending out an announcement on LinkedIn. We'll make sure everybody gets a link to that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's show. Again, thank you to Rob and Eddie for being here. We really hope that you found this valuable. Thank you very much for the active participation, all of you in the audience. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but thank you very much. And as I mentioned, this will be an ongoing show, and so we have a brief survey. We'd like everyone to participate as soon as the webinar ends as well. Eddie, Rob, thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Samuel.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.